And so in following on that, I know that his friends meant everything to him, and family, we're involved, but names were picked up, and we all had different names, and I need to do call-outs to various people for being part of his life. I'll start with, in our own family, I was known variously as Fathead. In the more Scandinavian tradition, which we weren't, Canute, and all that. My sister was known as Mean Bean, and how she got that, I never know. And how we developed y'all's names, who knows. Nicknames were a big deal. The more creative, the better. It is only fitting, as I said, to pay homage by reciting some of the nicknames, and you know who you are. So I'm going to do this in a very old-fashioned way. I'm going to say, I see weather, and I see Ford Bowl. I see Ben Franklin, Bougie Bear, T-Bird, I don't know where you are, T-Bird, but you're there, I know you are, Kugels, Roachy, there's a PDB, there's Thalvo / Boffy, there's Aunt Lariat, there's Mushroom Cap, last but not least, Beat. I was also requested to make some comments about the next generation in his network, and we have Pumpkin Butt, there's Pickleberry, and Muzzy. George loved his pals present at all the activities, whether it's fishing, spectator sports, late-night concerts, you name it. In George's world, as you probably knew, there were only 2 days in the week. There was Saturday, and there was game day. On a more serious note, the one thing my brother lamented was the absence of his father, Earling, who's gone exactly 50 years and 2 weeks to the day right now. The sporting life was in his blood, much like my father's, and he missed the guidance that he should have had, but he had a multitude of friends to fill the void. This is where I kind of go extemporaneous. Last night I was thinking, how do you make a conclusion to a speech like this? And a good friend of mine said, well, it'll come to you. It didn't come to me. And it's like, how do you sum it? Here's a guy, 50 years old and dead. And I've always been told, the younger you are, the bigger the group. And this is testament to that. If I was 40 years older, it'd just be the front row. So I thought, I can't finish it. So you know what I decided? I'm going to put it on you all to finish it. And do it in the way you live your lives, in the way you treat your friends and your loved ones. And you're going to do me a huge favor because I don't have to write it, A. And B, it'll be a tribute to George. And that's what he was all about. Thank you.
Weather.
And I would be weather. George. I just love saying the name George. It brings warmth to my heart because for me, there has always been and will always be only one George in my life. My friend and I go back many years, and to put it in perspective, if you look hard enough, you will find a picture somewhere here where I was actually bigger than George. So that can only have been a really long time. For all of you who knew George, you knew that George was larger than life. George had the biggest heart and an unconditional love for his family and friends. He had an aura about him that everybody wanted to be a part of. If it was a Christmas party or a spring pig roast at Robbie's house, when George arrived, everybody would gravitate to him. Clearly, George drew the crowd. I remember fishing up at Roby's cabin on Lake of the Woods with several of George's friends, closest friends, and all I heard after get to fish with George today. You fished with him yesterday. Okay, we'll switch at lunchtime. I would think to myself, doesn't anybody want to fish with me? It was George's kind heart and wonderful sense of humor that made him a special companion. One of my fondest memories was when Johnny, George, Bruce, and I decided to fly to New Orleans for a Saints Vikings playoff game. We tagged on an extra day on the trip to go fishing. Our fishing trip required a lengthy boat ride through the bayou. We also had a wager amongst us on the first fish, most fish, and biggest fish. As we were working our way through the channels and coming out into the open water, our Creole guide told George to sit down in the back of the boat. The guide made it clear we were going to speed up to a nice clip to get to our fishing spot. I will never forget George with his shorts and his sunglasses leaning forward to the guide and saying, "No worries, Mom. I am Big George and everything is Irish." Johnny looks at me with a smile and rolls his eyes. As we rounded the next corner at full tilt, we came into a school of flying fish. I noticed the guy quickly ducking to avoid a flying fish that flew right by his head and hit George straight in the groin. George grabbed a seat and started complaining about the plant pain. Clearly, it was not all irate. The consolation was he was in the running for first fish. We all have special memories of fun adventures we have shared with George, and he will truly be missed by family and friends. George lived his life to the fullest, which is a wonderful attribute we all want to remember and embrace ourselves. Many of us have heard the saying, "I'm not here for a long time, I'm here for a good time." My struggle today, and the struggle I know many of us share, is that being with George, as always, was always a good time. And all of us would trade anything for much more time with him. So, as we all look to the future, let each of us do what we can to be here for a long time. I know George wanted that for each and everybody gathered here today. And if there is a message, the message is more time will bring more good times. Now let's not forget that life is precious